Episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
Okay, and you're live.
Hello everyone, my name is Carol O, and I'm a cellist. I teach at New England Conservatory at the College for Chamber Music and cello and chamber music for the prep and continuing education divisions. I've also served on the faculty of NYU, Gordon College, MIT, various places. The intersection where I have had with the most amount of adult students has been with the Chamber Music Conference of the East, which for many, many decades had been taking place at Bennington College. Now it has moved to Colgate University up in upstate New York. And it's a wonderful community of musicians who all love to learn. And from them, I have learned a lot about how to communicate the joys and tribulations of practicing and of executing our art in performing of cello and chamber music and Western classical music in general. So today's presentation is on the efficient use of your practice time. And I expect that many of you will have a lot of questions, which I will very much look forward to answering towards the end. So I just wanted to extend welcome all of you and look forward to hearing from you guys in the chat. Drop a question in there whenever you see fit, and then I will try to get to it as much as possible at the end of my presentation. A friend once encouraged me as I was walking out onto stage to perform, to listen, love, and learn. I believe that a creative use of your body, mind, and spirit can help you work efficiently and effectively towards your musical goals when you practice. So none of us has enough time to practice. So what should you think about when you do get to your cello or to your instrument, any instrument, especially if your mind has had to be on other things throughout the day? After solving problems all day at work, at school, or taking care of your kids or parents, how should you go about getting better at playing your instrument? How do you organize your time? Those are very much the questions that I've had to really deal with throughout most of my life, because I was never just a traditional lover of music who just wanted to do nothing but cello. I had to figure out how to fight for space and time when I was going to a liberal arts college, and still maintain my dream of becoming a performer. So my encouragement to you today is, whether you are a beginner, intermediate, or advanced player, I hope you are already listening to a lot of different kinds of music in live performance situations as well as in recordings. If you have only a few things that you love to listen to and want to play, start to immerse yourself more in the vast classical music language and repertoire of the last 6 centuries. Be curious about the music of the various eras: medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, and the diverse genre of music from the past 100 years. So much of the great masterworks that are beloved were not composed in a vacuum. Every composer was a product of his or her time and learned from the sounds of their past. Bach's incredible solo cello suites would not have been possible without the development of concepts like intervals, harmony, imitative textures of the medieval motets, tone painting of the Renaissance madrigals, nor without the courtly dances of the high French Baroque era. Although we as string players often play wordless music, the composers we play may actually be better known or felt that they expressed themselves more fully in vocal or dramatic works. So for Bach, just to take him for instance, it would be just as important to listen to his harpsichord concertos, organ improvisations, as well as his passion music, like the St. Matthew or St. John Passions. We're coming up upon Easter, so as you can tell, passion music is very much on my mind. And a shout out to my daughter, who's nearing 100 page of her passion music thesis writing at Amherst College. Additionally, to imagine the dances in these suites, Bach suites that is, it would be helpful to see and listen to the operas and ballets by Jean-Baptiste Lully, the court composer to King Louis XIV of France. For solo chamber works by Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, we're now a bit later in history, it's always helpful to get to know Mozart's operas. They are fun to watch and to listen. And other composers, romantic composers like Schubert, Schumann, and Mendelssohn, it's definitely very helpful to get to know their Lieder, which is a German name for songs. Schubert wrote 900 of them. Tons of them. So he really found his expressive voice through them. And when we play quartets by Schubert, arpeggione sonata, piano trios, symphonies, it's always lovely to figure out what kind of words he might have been imagining with your particular phrase. So the more vocal and dance music you can listen to and experience, the more expressive clues you will find in the musical phrases in your non-vocal music. So outside of listening to a lot of music to feed your intellectual curiosity and your soul, consider mastering skills that help you internalize pitch and harmony, rhythm and articulation, dynamics and phrasing. These skills will make prioritizing and practicing in future stages easier and more efficient. So then, what about the notes that you play? As you can tell from what I've already mentioned about listening to a lot of music, I take a long view of cello practicing. I like to make sure that what I think about in practice has long-lasting effects and that I do not have to double back and relearn something that was done thoughtlessly or incorrectly. It is helpful to have priorities when you learn music. So I do believe that it is very important to develop your reading skills and your inner ear. Know that we can't make the appropriate sounds if we don't have a mental image of what we want to hear. So for pitch and good intonation, get to know intervals and harmony. Get good at reading them and singing them. If you're a beginner and you're unfamiliar with intervals, you can take a music theory class, or you can go online to a free website called musictheory.net. On that website, you'll learn all about how to read notes, intervals, which are distances between two notes, and different intervals of two or more can harmonize to form chords. So most music, including pop music, charm or touch our hearts with their simple or complex harmonies. So it's important to be well-versed in intervals and chords. And then practically speaking, intonation on the cello is based on what you hear and how you develop spatial awareness and a mental choreography of how to move around in a healthy manner around your instrument. It is helpful when working on intonation to hear notes in the context of harmony. Sing and internalize what you hear so that it will be easier to play them with your hands on your instrument. Music theory classes will usually offer resources to help you get better at sight reading and sight singing. Some of the books that my kids have found useful are solfege books by Dandolo, Don Heuser, and Berkowitz. These are just a few among many, many good solfege books. Solfege is just a French term for singing notes with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Some of you might have come across it if you ever watched the Sound of Music movie, in which Julie Andrews, the nanny, teaches young children to sing. So those notes are, traditionally taught in conservatories and music theory classes on how to help you learn to read music and hear the intervals in your head. So aside from just simple notation, obviously, scales, arpeggios, they're both really great tools for learning patterns. They develop your ear and build spatial awareness for navigating the geography of your fingerboard. Since most every piece is made up of scales and arpeggios, Maybe not always a full scale or a full arpeggio up and down 3 or 4 octaves, but there are always little snippets of them, and you need to be able to ferret them out as you look at the music. So you should become well-versed in all major and minor scales and arpeggios. These help you to see and hear patterns in music. So why scales? Well, scales teach you how to read and hear neighboring notes traveling in only 2 directions, up or down. So it's very simple. Chromatic scales teach you all about half steps. So these are the smallest distance between notes that we have in conventional classical Western music. There are many cultures across the globe that do use semitones or quarter tones, but for the purpose of our discussion today, we will just stay with half steps being the smallest intervals, and they happen to be also the smallest interval in most pianos. All the white and black keys, every key that is next to each other is a half step apart. So those are the sounds you want to become most familiar with, and your fingers want to develop the ability on your instrument to be able to feel that interval. Major and minor mode scales teach you the repetitive pattern of where half and whole steps are within each octave. On the cello, these modes teach you to see a cluster of 3 or 4 consecutive notes at a time and learn how to frame your hand for half or whole steps within each position before you shift. So you should learn and memorize one good set, or even a few good sets of fingerings for scales. In the end, the more patterns you know by heart and can quickly observe, the faster you can sight read and the faster you will be at learning new repertoire. And what about arpeggios now? What are their benefits? Well, arpeggios teach you about skips and about transportation of your arm over bigger distances on your fingerboard. So knowing the intervals that make up major and minor triads or seventh chords are immensely helpful. They help you to see and hear harmony in chordal or broken chord forms. Your eyes and your ears should learn to pick out arpeggios in different inversions. In a standard arpeggio, you learn major and minor thirds as well as perfect fourths. And oftentimes you have to shift between at least one of these intervals. So it is important to learn how to anticipate the shifts so that you can improve your accuracy as you hop around the cello, navigating these intervals. And shifting in arpeggios definitely involve a bigger part of your body. You cannot just be thinking about your fingers. You've got to be feeling your left arm and how it leaps up and rotate towards the next higher position or come down on your fingerboard. So you should imagine your hand framing of the intervals, thirds, major or minor thirds, and fourth across the strings for a new block of notes in every position. Imagine them, hear them before you move. So I like to work on the following technical skills through scales and arpeggios. I do like to develop a rhythmic and horizontal spatial awareness with my bow arm. So oftentimes I will ask my students to play scales with 4 notes to a bow, or 6 note, 8, 12, or 24 notes per bow. So you're learning to increase your speed while navigating space, a horizontal space with your bow as you're feeling time. So you're learning rhythm, continuous feelings, and then figuring out how to navigate the space to your right and your left. So that's a horizontal plane. In arpeggios, I tend to ask for 3 notes or 6 or 9 notes per bow, again using this sostenuto bow arm. So definitely you get very good at feeling time and navigating space, okay? And I like to tell my students, use all the space around you. Think of this big, gigantic circular bubble all around you, in front of you, all around the side and back, because you will use all of yourself when you play. So make sure to work on left hand technique also. And it's important that when you're practicing scales and arpeggios to move with quick and light shifts, okay? And other left-hand techniques to develop would be proper curvature of your fingers and framing of intervals. and also to develop a calm and relaxed finger habit. And that means when you're going up in the scales, to make sure that you don't have your fingers flying up the minute you finish using them, that you keep them gently down or lightly touching the string, not to strain, but just to keep them basically light and relaxed. And going down, you should anticipate all the intervals you're about to play, at least 3 intervals, is what I tell my students, so that you know whether you're going to have a whole step here, half step there, where your half and whole steps are in thumb position, whatever. I'm just using my arm now instead of my cello for the Zoom screen here. And so if you anticipate them, you shift and you'll be able to get your fingers immediately already choreographed for that position, and that will help you keep a whole block of notes in tune for the long haul. So there's a question from Kevin about suggesting a good scale and arpeggio book. There are many, but the 2 that I use more often, actually 3 that I use more often with my own students, it's just a very simple, straightforward scale pattern and fingering in the back of the Stephen Dayak book for Modern Methods for Violoncello, book 2. So at the end of that etude book are several pages of all 12 major scales, and both the melodic and minor scales, all 3 and 4 octaves. And then after that are all the arpeggios as well. So those are some very good, steady, stable fingerings that teach you a good pattern. And once my students master that, I usually then suggest that they move on to Galamian book of scales and arpeggios, Galamian system, or the Carl Flesch system is adapted from the violins. And those offer sometimes alternate fingerings. And in the case of Galamian, there's a wonderful section on arpeggios that have you do a whole routine of major and minor scales, as well as diminished and augmented triad arpeggios, and different inversions of the 6th chord, the 4th chord, and dominant 7th chord. So it's a whole routine that will then have you finish and get ready for the next scale. In the Galamian book, it moves up by half step. In the Flesch book, there's a similar routine for arpeggios with the different kinds of arpeggios, but it moves on a circle of fifth, which I really love, because that really helps you to focus on key areas and what's related, what keys are related to each other by going, from F major to B flat, E flat, or C to F, something like that. That helps you orient yourself in key signatures and different keys. And there's a Flesch book I also like because it gives you alternate fingerings for practicing the scale, going up only one string at a time, or in thumb position going across. So there's a lot of different varieties of fingerings and patterns that you can really learn. So I also, besides working on scales and arpeggios, I also really encourage everyone to work on double stop exercises, etudes, or thirds and sixth scales, and those are definitely in the Flesch, Carl Flesch scale system book. So they can help you learn finger spacing across two strings, okay? And personally, I like to make a glossary of finger spacing patterns and hand shapes for all double stops, so that when I encounter them in new pieces, I can kind of go, oh, well, there's a minor sixth, so my fingers need to be in half steps across the string. Or there's a major third, I want to feel a whole step across the string between, say, E and C sharp would be on D and A string, okay? And the reverse of a minor sixth would be an augmented fourth. So hopefully you do get to encounter those definitely in more chromatic music. And in perfect fourth is the alternate, like switching the strings feeling from major sixth. So that's definitely helpful for you to know playing any kind of string instruments that's tuned to a fifth, perfect fifth, okay? And one funny quirk that I remember just thinking about when I was learning major and minor thirds is that major thirds are bigger intervals. They are just definitely bigger, two whole steps away if you're just playing them on the same string. But across a string, they actually feel smaller than if you're trying to play a minor third across 2 strings. So that's a good helpful tip or quirk to know. And there's a question about how to practice them, and that I'll deal with later, and how about double stops and how much time. And if I don't get to it, remind me. And but I do want to move on to other things, other priorities right now, which is rhythm. So although I talk about intonation in the context of learning note patterns, I think a trap that one can get into is focusing too long on intonation before thinking about anything else. You can waste a lot of time if you're not thinking about rhythm early enough in your practicing. So do remember that when you first encounter a piece of music, one of the first pieces of information that your composer gives you is the meter, the numbers that are written right at the beginning of a staff of notes, right? So do you understand how to read the numbers in the meter written by the composer at the beginning of your piece? So a beginner, I really encourage you to learn those things as quickly, as early as possible, because then it'll get you to a really wonderful path to learning music quickly. So I'm going to go get past that now. But the important thing for everyone, I think, regardless of how advanced you are, is do you know where the pulses are in a piece of music? If it's 4/4, depending on the tempo marking, you might want to feel that in 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's a little bit faster or there are more flowing notes, maybe you want to feel that piece with 2 big pulses. And if it's fast enough, maybe every four beats, you want to only feel 1 in a big pulse in a fast piece. Okay, so you can think about that in 6/8. Oftentimes, you can obviously think in 6 beats, 6 slow beats, or in 2 fast pulses. You want to know how to organize. And subdivisions are also very important, especially if you're going to be playing a lot of chamber music or orchestra. You want to make sure you know how to come off of ties and play quick notes and be able to play well with other people if you're counting and subdividing the same way. And you want to definitely, at that point, keep track of what you're counting, whether you're counting small 16th note beats or whether you're counting big quarter note pulses as you subdivide, like 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and or 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Whatever it is that you're counting, I advise you to definitely count with numbers. As much as we can get used to, most teachers will advise at some point for you to use the metronome, which is a very good idea. And we can get used to this tick, 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 tick sound. But it's very important to count with numbers. Because it helps you organize where in the bar you are. It helps you track your music and later on to actually, more importantly, feel the differences between the different kinds of beats. So to feel internalized rhythm, I recommend that you clap with your hands, conduct, or walk with your feet. So we're cellists, we can't get up and walk around like my violinist friends. I'm always very envious of that. But you can pick up your legs and feet and maybe alternate left and right. Start with 1, 2, whatever it is. That way you can really feel it in your whole torso, your whole body, how to feel those big beats. And that way you will be able to do what one of my teachers once said to me, swallow your metronome. Because obviously we can't take a metronome on stage with us. We really need to be able to count on our own sense of pulse and feeling that with your whole body by walking while you're sitting, while you're practicing. And that is a lot to coordinate. It takes a little while, so don't be frustrated if you can't do it right away. It took me a while to get good at that, and it takes all of my students a little bit of time. We have a good laugh when we were trying to do it together. But anyways, that helps you internalize. And it's also after you deal with the basics of feeling it and you get really good at your subdivisions and you're generally able to play with everybody else in your string quartet or orchestra, and you're never the one that's finish the piece first or finish the piece after everybody's done, then let's move on to understanding the hierarchy of beats. You need to know the roles of the different beats that you see in your music. So importantly, everybody knows where downbeats are, especially if you play in an orchestra. Conductor gives you a downbeat, boom. And usually a lot of heavier parts of the music happens on downbeats. So you want to know how to express the beats with your bow, with your sound. So, and also definitely learn where the strong and weak beats are, right? So in regular 4/4 meter pieces, first and third beats are usually the stronger beats. 2 and 4 are the weaker beats. 4 usually will be an upbeat. So the last beat of a measure is usually the upbeat. So it usually tends to feel lighter and propels you into the next bar. So they have different functions. So you definitely want to feel where the beats feel more vertical, like where you can feel the beat going down. Use your bow. You might want to dig into the string a little bit more for, stronger, heavier beats. And then horizontal beats, like third beats that sort of connect to the fourth beat before you go to the next downbeat. Maybe you want to keep use more bow. Feel that linearity of the phrasing, the horizontality of music. And know that even after you get very good at figuring out how beats are usually organized, that a good composer is going to be playing with your expectations. They're going to sometimes bring a strong beat to make it happen on the second or fourth beat. Sometimes you'll get accents on those things, and it might not feel easy or convenient to do so, but you have to do it because it's part of the musical game that is being played. And so then also, in terms of practically speaking, what are the intersection of rhythm and what we do? Well, it really truly affects our bow. Two very simple and straightforward things I can mention too is that know that even number of notes when you have them to play in a beat is always easier to play. So if you're working on, say, Popper etude number 6 in the 40 high school etudes, there are 4/16 notes per beat in a 4/4 meter. And the whole thing is just through compose all 16th notes from beginning to end. And it's very easy to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So your down bows are always consistently on a beat. And that feels pretty easy. And you want to know that you're doing that. You can groove to that. Now, odd number notes that you have to play, especially in an odd meter like 3/4 or 9/8 or something like that, that takes work because basically every beat will happen on opposite bows, down bow and up bow. You have to get good you have to be comfortable with feeling the pulses on opposite down or up bow. So it's very helpful definitely to remember to feel the pulse in your elbow. Okay, whenever you're playing and you're thinking, gosh, this is a rhythmically challenging thing. So yes, of course you have to figure out what you have to do with your left hand and find the right notes and all of that and coordinate. I'm not going to talk too much about coordination today. That's too long for today. But rhythm, suffice it to say, really know your numbers. So you know down, especially when you're counting 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4. So on a 4/4 meter, if you're doing triplets, or if you're doing dotted rhythms like in Popper number 5, 3 dotted rhythm notes per beat for downbeat, and third beat will be on down bows. Second and fourth beats will be felt on strongly on up bows. Okay, so then musically speaking, when do you know how do you know when to show or not show the pulse or rhythm? So I think of rhythm expression as akin to sort of exoskeleton or endoskeleton. So the exoskeleton like bugs, right? You can see the hard shells and things like that. And so some pieces of music that are highly energetic, or you're meant to be able to feel the speed and energy of the piece, that the part of the character of that piece is to be able to show the rhythm. You might want to show dotted rhythms or whatever, or fast 16th note rhythm. So those are when you want to show the rhythm. It's part of the character. But some pieces, the character of the music is calm, and you should not draw attention to the pulses or rhythm, because sometimes the composer even writes tranquillo, or don't show any beats, or just pianissimo. So you'll have to figure out how to use your bow to make a singing gesture, or to keep your bow very calm as you count and not have any kind of accents. Okay? And now somebody has asked about boredom. I will definitely talk about helpful ways to navigate and organize a practice after, touching upon a few more of the elements of music that you should pay attention to. Now, after organizing your music rhythmically, it is good to consider your sound and articulations. So these are the doorway to musical expressions. And when considered thoughtfully and executed well, you should be able to keep yourself and your audience awake. So do incorporate articulations into your practice early on. Same day, if at all possible, as figuring out the rhythm and the pitch of any new piece. Don't wait, okay? Your observations will immediately determine what sounds you need to make and how to use your bow. So sustaining or articulating, it's important to understand the general aesthetics for different eras of music that you are playing. And so Baroque in the earlier music, like the Baroque and classical era music, it's important for you to understand that the word articulation actually came from the world of art and architecture. And sustaining a sound long term was not the principal concern of beauty at that time. And music of that period was meant to delight and to entertain and not remain static. And so you'll find a plethora of articulations in music from this age. And the bow technique of this era focus on agility, quick changes of bow placement, bow speeds and pressures, quick changes on those too, to articulate dance rhythms, sing a song, share your ideas and emotions. I'll touch on more of this later. And later music like romantic and more contemporary music, sustaining became a bigger deal, honestly, in the 19th century, right? The world of literature started to focus on the romantic hero who perseveres in pursuing his ideals and dreams, despite pressures from the society or despite dissonant voices from people near him. And so subjective emotions win the day in the music of this era. And the bow technique has to keep up with sonority, with much more singing, different vicissitudes of emotions that you need to express. Not so much dance music that is generally meant to entertain. But there's of course always still dance music. But you're also dealing with rising level of sounds from the piano and from larger forces of the orchestra. So for a practical consideration of sound and articulation, I like to make a glossary of articulation. I would recommend that you do too. As you, let's take for example in Bach suites. So if you make an glossary of articulations, these will help you actually start to recognize how often different articulations occur throughout all 6 dance suites. And you'll also start to recognize them in other Baroque and Enlightenment era composers, compositions by Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, just to name the 3 big ones. And what is very important as you start to look at the articulation, that means slurs, dots under slurs, or just nothing on top of notes, then that's also just detached notes, right? What's really important is, even though we are string players, please know that slurs are not bowings. There are some composers who are primarily performers on their instrument. They are known as performers maybe even more than they are known as composers. They sometimes do use dots under slurs as like up bow staccatos or down bow staccatos. And that is one sort of niche technique that you do need to have to be able to play a lot of different kinds of music, but they are not primarily the articulation, the sounds that should occur to you, especially by music that's composed by mostly pianists like Beethoven and Mozart and Mendelssohn, these guys. So all articulations you see should have a very specific sound, kind of sound in your mind. So legato, the thing that uses a slur over notes, should be able to sing smoothly without bumps. Yeah, you should not be, and if you see your bow doing this, you are not making an appropriate legato. Now, there is one category of notes that many of my college students even sometimes ignore or maybe don't even really think about, and that's the one that I just talked about, dots under slurs. This is called portato, and it is a singing singing type of articulation. So if you're singing, say, do, re, mi, fa, under a slur, you're very much making it smooth. With portato, you might be singing do, re, mi, fa. There's a little bit of there. Everything's going to be all right type of emotion sometimes expressed by the dots under slurs. So then, of course, there's dots without any slurs, and those are staccatos. They should be, nice and short and bright and lifted, and they have that kind of fun, more energy type of feeling. And then there's just detached notes that just don't have anything on top. So sometimes it's very useful to know that you should articulate the beginning and end of a sound when it does not connect to another sound. So bow budgeting, another practical concern. You really need to figure out as you're playing the music, first of all, from the holistic picture, figure out who you are and what you are saying in this piece of music that you want to play. Are you singing, dancing, or telling a story? Those are the three basic things that all humankind has done since time immemorial. And it's no different as we use music to communicate those three of our favorite activities. So if you're singing or telling a story, you might use longer sostenuto bow strokes to sing your tune and tell your story. If you're dancing, you will have to learn to fly with your bow, become much more agile and specific with how you land your bow. And one of the things that I love to encourage my students to do is to fall in love with the lower half of your bow. Lower half in the middle of your bow. It's kind of like the living room of your bow. You should use it very often. And in earlier music, oftentimes shorter legato notations that are preceded or followed by detached notes are often easier to execute in the lower half of the bow. And also, another very helpful thing is to learn the technique of retracing so that when you are singing notes in a longer bow, you learn to quickly fly to the lower half of the bow to play something very highly articulated, staccato, or detached, or something that has that kind of quixotic change in sound. So other considerations for bow placement on the string or at the frog would be figure out, are you the solo voice or are you accompanying someone, right? In chamber music and orchestra, we really need to do that all the time. So if you're a soloist, you might want to navigate your bow closer to the bridge, use the lower half of the bow more often to sink into the string and create a sound that can soar above someone else who's accompanying you. And if you're accompanying, well, do the opposite. You might have more chance to play closer to the fingerboard, play lighter bow pressure so that you're not drowning out the people you're accompanying. So now that we've dealt with sort of the sound in our articulations that are open the doorway for your musical expressions, let's talk about how dramatic your story can now be articulated. And that's dealing with dynamics and your bow. So get to know, with any composition you choose to perform, get to know the personal voice of your composer and the specific story you are telling. So what I find helpful is to chart your dynamics. Notice the dynamics in that movement or that section of music that you're working on. How volatile is it? Do you have a lot of pianissimos, piano that go all the way up to forte, fortissimo, triple, quadruple fortes, lots of accents? Or is it very gentle? You just are pretty much just staying piano, mezzo piano, pianissimo all the time, right? Is it black and white dynamics where it's just contrast, only big stark contrast of forte immediately followed by piano with no crescendo diminuendos in between? So Beethoven, for instance, many of his compositions, those of you who have the joys of playing string quartets by Beethoven or symphonies, you'll find that you have to develop the bow skills to be able to sustain long, loud sounds and immediately release and play a subito or sudden piano with no break, no rest, nothing. You have to figure out the timing of how to articulate that and get your bow, figure out how to use gravity and release gravity from your bow arm to be able to do that. And also what you want to notice with dynamics is how long does it last? How long does one dynamic last? Do you have crescendos and diminuendos, and how long do those things last? if you have a piano crescendo to forte and you have 4 bars to do so in a relatively slow piece, that's like going on a slow journey. You have a long time to prepare for it. But if you have only 2 quick beats to do it, that's a super fast on ramp to a super highway from a slow country road, and that could take a lot of skills, and you definitely want to develop that. And then also crescendos and diminuendos that go back, are back to back in a hairpin style. You find a lot of that in music by Schumann and Mendelssohn. They have swells of emotion or just changing vicissitudes in emotion that they're expressing all the time. So you want to be able to figure out how to count with your bow and add or release pressure as you're making crescendos or diminuendos. Okay, figure out where the phrase, you can figure out where the phrases are from looking at the dynamics also. That's one nice thing of noticing dynamics early. It's like, I guess this phrase can last, or these phrases make up this important idea of emotions that this composer is trying to communicate. It's important to know the natural characteristics of your bow, because I will hope you make good bowing choices. So bow mechanics grow out of your observations of what your bow naturally wants to do. The frog is the heaviest part of our bow, and the tip is light. The bow frog is wonderful for sustaining because it's heavy. And the tip, by the way, can bounce really easily. If you're doing ricochet, really bouncy bow stuff, you do it out closer to the tip. It'll be very easy out there. Obviously, you have to learn to control it, but it's easier to do out there than trying to do it at the frog. Okay, a down bow makes a natural diminuendo, and up bow makes a natural decrescendo, natural crescendo, sorry. And so that's helpful to know. Practice bowing different dynamics against the natural inclination of the bow. So I use scales to practice down bow crescendos or up bow diminuendos. And I also use my scales to practice hairpins while I count, okay? So, and organizing bowings and making good bowing decisions, you might want to start at the climax. Look at a phrase, figure out how you want it to end, and look at the climax. You might want to put if it's a really powerful, loud moment, you might want to down bow there and then work your way back from that moment. Don't start bowing just from the beginning and then hope that it all works out later. Work from the climax of a phrase, sometimes backwards or forward, okay? And I can't emphasize this enough. I'll say it again. Sing or intone your dynamics. Sing everything, right? Feel the drama with your heart and soul. Singing inside helps you to internalize what you see on the music. And if you are convinced by what you're singing, you don't have to be doing it in front of anybody. Just do it in the privacy of your own room. If you are convinced by by the dynamics that you're singing, by the extremes, if there are some extreme dynamics, chances are your audience will feel it too. They'll like it too. And that's a good way to sort of prepare for that. All right, so I mentioned phrasing as I touched upon dynamics. And so finally, we're going to talk about phrasing, which is the heart and soul of music making. So a very helpful thing to organize about phrases is this. You need to know how long phrases last, okay? Where does a phrase start or end? They don't all necessarily start on the first beat of a measure, okay? Most standard phrases in classical music, and pop music too, actually, the phrases last 4 bars. And structures of phrases, or a bunch of phrases in what German classical Enlightenment period music oftentimes go 4 bars plus 4 bars, followed by an 8-bar phrase, or 2 bars and 2 bars followed by a 4-bar phrase. Okay, antecedent consequent phrases, they're called sometimes. So know when phrases actually deviate from these standard 4 bars. Sometimes when you're trying to memorize a piece of music, you might be figuring out, gosh, why am I having such a hard time with this section? Why can I never remember? More often than not, probably you'll find out that the composer, maybe in a Bach prelude or something like that, suddenly went into a 6-bar phrase, or use a 3 or 7 or 9-bar phrase. So that trips you up. You were kind of flowing, going along easily, and suddenly you're just like, wait, what just happened? That's because he just played a trick on you and changed the numbers, the structure. As you're working on your phrases, also, phrases are like sentences that we speak, right? So the more sentences, a collection of sentences can form a paragraph. So you want to know also about the structure of your phrases. How many phrases make up a section? And how many sections do you have in this movement or piece that you're playing? So going back to the Bach suites example, if you're playing an allemande or courante or sarabande, those are binary forms. You've got two sections, double bars, two double bars. But if you're playing, say, the bourrées, minuets, or gavottes, which are usually in our six suites, come in group of two, they are ternary form. You get three parts, right? First minuet, second minuet, and then a da capo back to the first minuet, A, B, A, right? So it's helpful to navigate the musical gestures, the musical ideas, and figure out where the contrasts may happen or character. And now, what is really important when you're practicing is continuity, okay? Practice from the beginning of a phrase. Again, don't necessarily start at the beginning of a bar. Practice from the beginning of a phrase. Sing a phrase and then practice that phrase, okay? By practicing a phrase at a time, you learn to anticipate the delicious elements that personalize that phrase. So every phrase has notes, a set of notes or intervallic relationships, rhythmic patterns, as we just talked about, articulation patterns, harmonic progressions, and dynamics. So all of this contribute to the full emotional experience of that moment in time, that beautiful phrase that drew you to want to play that piece to begin with. You are doing it if you are really able to go think through all of these things and combine that. And phrases should sound inevitable. You should know what type of phrases you are playing. Are you making a statement, a declarative sentence with that phrase? Are you asking a question, interrogative phrase? Are you shocked or expressing amazement or upset, exclamatory statement? Or are you demanding something? Yeah, imperative statement. So know what type of phrase you're making, and that'll add to your creative outlet, and that will keep you from those moments where you just feel like you're stagnating in your practice time. Now, performing and memorizing, if you should be able to find time to memorize in your busy day, if you practice in phrases and practice in sections, once you can chart your way through the whole of a piece of music, you're ready to sing, dance, and help the composer tell a wonderful personal story. So know that memorizing is hardest when, composers play all sorts of tricks on you with rhythm. We kind of gently touched upon that, with phrase length, with different dynamics. So those might be things that, might have been historically tripping you up from memorizing. And it would be good to know where the traps are and know that it's all fun and games for the composer. So treat it as such. Don't take it too seriously and, come down hard on yourself. And if you don't memorize, it's still great to just know what you're dealing with, what you're seeing on the music, and how to deal with that. So now I'm towards the end of my presentation, and I do want to just come back to the idea of actively engaging all of yourself. To hopefully, by creatively engaging your mind, body, and spirit whenever you practice, I hope you can experience what my friend has suggested, which is to listen, love, and learn whenever you pick up your cello. I think that's the experience that keeps me from falling into a rut. And just that those ideas of engaging in music from so many different directions help you arrive at the heart and soul of playing. And I do have a few tips for keeping you physically and mentally healthy when you practice. You want to start a practice session by having an agenda of things that you want to accomplish. I have a student who often comes with her cell phone with a whole list. And before I even say anything, she's got, I've got questions. And so she goes through her list of, how do I do this calisthenics better in the, Galamian scales or flesh arpeggios? How do I play this section? So have an agenda will really help you structure your time and make the time that you invest in that moment of practicing fruitful, or at least you have a chance to make it very fruitful. And decide how much time you can practice that day or that part of the day, right? Once you have your agenda, so you can be realistic with what you can accomplish And sometimes even if you go after the ideal, and if you don't finish accomplishing that, you've done your best, and that's good enough. Be happy with that. I find it helpful to use a timer on occasion, to set a timer for 15 or 30 minutes so that you can see what you're accomplishing. You know, if you've got that agenda and sort of go, well, I think it'll take me maybe hopefully 15 minutes to get these 4 bars in tune, or figure out the bow stroke. And you'll find out, well, maybe it takes less time than that. Or my goodness, that's really hard. That's going to take me more, 4 times that amount of time. You can learn a lot about yourself in what you know and what you don't know. And that will inform your next time when you set the timer again. The timer also has a helpful, is very helpful also to help you to actually remember to get up and stretch your body, walk around for your physical health, you know, so you're not sitting too long and hurting your back. It also gives you a chance to reset and refresh. You know, if you're struggling with something, you're frustrated, when that timer rings, stop. Put your bow down, put your cello down, clear your head, walk around. If you're losing focus or getting frustrated, this is great. It gives you a moment to break that, you know, terrible cycle of trying over and over again something that doesn't work and just makes you upset. And it gives you a moment, gives you a mind a moment to rest and a moment to think, aha, let me try something different. If a solution that you tried didn't work, sing, do something else. I know the last thing I sometimes think about is to sing, because I'm so busy trying to play that. Why isn't that working? And when that timer rings, it's just like, oh, let me walk away from all of this. And when I come back, it's like, well, what do I really want, right? I find singing to really help my mind to focus on a true vision of how I want the music to go, and not what my arms are dictating what is only possible for that moment of my creative self. So that when you have multiple ways to sort of stop you from going down a not such a happy path, it's a good way to allow your technique to adapt and to develop, to really help to be able to convey what the music really needs from you to be able to communicate to the world. So that's all I have to share today, and I'll be really happy to take any and all questions. I think I've already, in the chat box, I believe I've seen answered the questions about scales and double stops. Let's see here. How long should one spend on practicing each interval? Well, I think let's see, how about double stops? Interval, I think it depends on where you are in your encounters with that. If you're just starting out, just trying to play some basic intervals in tune, then I would say spend 15-20 minutes on something new and foreign and get that better, and move on to something else. Don't get stuck with one thing, one note or one set of double stops for too long. If you're an advanced player and you're dealing with the flesh thirds and sixths scales, same thing. Spend 15 minutes, half an hour, and figure out what it is that you know and what you don't know, and then decide, gosh, this doesn't sound so good. My sound is terrible. Let me work on my bow. My intervals are really out of tune. I don't really know whether I'm playing major thirds or minor thirds. Everything just sounds gentle. Then maybe you want to isolate, 4 double stop intervals at a time in sequence and get those in tune. While your mind is fresh, stop, come for a few seconds. I'm a strong advocate for stopping and thinking before you do something again, or before you move on to something else. It will help you make your practicing more fruitful. So from Erica, does the first scale resource you mentioned use a fingering pattern where it is the same fingering for all major and melodic minors as found in the Fouillard? I'm not so familiar with the Fouillard, but the Stephen Deak book that I mentioned, Deak is the last name, Modern Methods for Violoncello, book 2. It has scales basically that starts on the C string and goes across to the A string and then goes straight up the A string. And the patterns are generally 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 for the last 2 octaves, and that is a very useful pattern to know for scales up high. I think Janos Starker also has in his method book scales that helps you go across in thumb position. There are a couple other books that are not necessarily scale books, but I find them to be helpful if you're trying to figure out how to play better in tune in thumb position. Rick Mooney's Thumb Position Book 1 and 2. He uses sort of folk tunes and self-composed fun tunes for you to just navigate the different parts of your fingerboard up there. Starker also loves to use tough parts of major masterworks and turn that into an exercise. So be creative with that. If you find that there's a passage of music in your piece that you're having trouble with, his solution, what Starker did was the last movement of the Beethoven A major cello sonata has a very tough sort of fast section. So he makes a pattern out of it where you're playing that section and then just going up by half steps and redoing that pattern over and over again, starting on different notes, different key. So if you don't mind mentioning the first scale, okay, I did do that. Okay, so how many octaves to study for Jampolsky cello book. I am aware that I am less familiar with that book, but for intermediate player, how many octaves should you study? I usually do 2 octaves. I go 3 octave G scale. Well, if you already know how to navigate the thumb position or are ready to learn how to deal with a little bit of thumb position, I always encourage people to do 3 octaves. And once you know how to get up there, then 3rd and 4th octave, 3 or 4 octaves is really not, that 4th octave is not that big a deal. So I usually ask all my students to play 4 octave scales out of every scale, regardless of whether the book only asks for 3. Usually books will have scales that start on the G string as only 3 octave scales written out that way, but I ask all my students to play 4 octave scales, those who have learned how to navigate up in thumb position. So do you have a recommendation of what to do when one reaches a state of boredom after practicing for a while? Well, I would say if you are bored, then just get up and leave the cello and go do something else more fun. And come back when you have an agenda, when you sort of think, oh gosh, I really want to get good at this passage or this piece of music, or I'm super excited about a new piece of music. I'm ready to work on that. So don't sit there and punish yourself or be frustrated. So I hope that helps. And I think using a timer, as I suggested, I think that could certainly help break you out of a rut. So if you're getting bored, and it just means that you need to switch your mind to a different gear. Have you examined looking at the different parts of the music, like articulation, dynamic, phrasing, So if you've thought of it all and you've sort of thought, gosh, I think I've accomplished everything I need to do, everything sounds great, then please, by all means, go get an ice cream. Go have fun. Go hang out with your friends. Okay, so the practice room segment, if you can see let's see, here's the question, if you can read out loud. All right, how do you stimulate creativity and imagination in the practice room? What is the first thing you do on the cello every day? Oh, okay, let's see. Well, I do like to try different things. So there isn't one thing that I always do on the cello. I guess the more often than not, I will start with a scale. In arpeggio, I do my calisthenics, as one of my students like to call it. First, scales and arpeggios, they are kind of like taking a shower, just figuring out how to just address the cello, make a nice sound, figure out, warming up my fingers and feel the finger spacing and feel like I'm in touch with my cello again. Sometimes, instead of a regular scale, I might decide to go and play a whole tone scale. Play all in everything in arpeggio in only minor thirds, arpeggio in only augmented thirds, or just something, change it up. Or if I sort of find that, low string sounds, I'm so used to that, I'm kind of bored, I'll turn the scale upside down. I'll start at the very top, the 4th octave, highest note, come down and come back up. Arpeggios, I also do the same thing. I also then sometimes, if I'm, if I'm home and I have a whole bunch of scale books that I haven't used and that I've shopped and sometimes not had a chance to use, I go and explore those. So I like to always try something new periodically when I have time. And something that I think I do also like to go to the keyboard. I have my grand piano behind me here. I love to play through any piece of music that I play on the cello, on the piano. So for instance, I remember working on the Bach E-flat suite, the fourth suite, and then I just remember how frustrating it was to see the pedal tone, which is a repeated E-flat that happens for at least 8 bars, and not be able to sustain it, And so I went to the piano and literally started to play this like this. Etc. So it's just a way to sort of help me feel the music from a different instrumental perspective. I also I will study the score, and if it's a piano score, I will go and play through and sing my own part. So for me, practicing isn't just about staying on the cello. I don't get bored that often because I do run back and forth between the piano and the cello, and I do also sing. And if I am learning, I think I remember sort of thinking that when I was working on the Prokofiev Sinfonia Concertante at one point, that the tuba had an interesting bass line that I had to tune to or be aware of. So I was trying to sing that part from the tuba, because obviously I don't play the tuba, and then figure out how my notes relate to the harmony for that. So I was trying to actively sing that. I'm not very good at singing. My friends in the contemporary musical arts at NEC are much better at being able to sing and play their violins and dance and whistle at the same time. I'm not that talented, but I do try different things to give me, to inform my ability to deal with music on a different and changing and creative way all the time. Okay, so another question from Tony is, do you have any advice in practicing technical passages? Yeah, absolutely. Well, it depends on the technical passage. If you're looking at quick, fast scalar passages in, say, Haydn C major last movement, where it's all very fast separate bow, I would, of course, practice fast things from slow to fast. Learn the notes in thumb position and coordinate. A lot of it is coordination between the bow hand and the right hand. So some of what I mentioned earlier about feeling the pulse with 16th notes in your bow arm, you definitely want to figure out how to coordinate that as you are navigating shifts and notes like that. Sometimes practicing technical passages involve, playing triplets or odd number notes and feeling different bows, right? Different feelings of beats with bows. So a lot of it is coordination, and sometimes it's just also being aware of dynamics. Okay, so that's definitely, a lot of it has to do with your bow. So make sure, again, you're not stuck on just, wrestling with, why can't I play in tune? Make sure you're thinking way beyond just intonation, because if you think of the whole, intonation will also take care of itself the more you work on it. So another question is, in your mind, what is it that makes an effective practice session? Well, in an effective practice session, for me, it is when I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do. So if I'm working on a piece of music, and I say, well, in the amount of time that I have, I want to be able to play this passage, a technical fast passage, brilliantly. I will do what I just mentioned. Pick a tempo. And tempo might be the most important decision you make every single day you practice. Finding a tempo that will allow me to be able to think not only about how to play those notes in tune, how to make a beautiful sound, and how to make it articulate, and make sure that I deliver the dynamics and be able to create the emotions that I believe that the composer is trying to communicate. And I'm making a phrase that is emotionally satisfying to me. So at a very slow tempo for something that's medium or fast, it might not be very musically gratifying yet, but you kind of have to have on faith that those will happen as you're trying to do all these things. A slow enough tempo, and that's different than a very slow tempo. So when you are choosing a tempo, just the right one is one that allows you to be able to be effectively articulating and making the sounds that you want with your left and right hands. And all of those things, for me, makes an effective moment in working on a session. And a session, depending on whether it's half an hour, 2 hours, or 5 hours, is really just a lot of linking up of these moments where I am engaging myself actively, solving problems of technical problems on the instrument with my hands, and imagining how to lift those tough passages or simple passage, and navigating through the tough and the easy to make a whole that is satisfying. So a musical inspired, or at least positive turn of musical expression usually is what I feel is an effective practice session. So let's see. Another question is, how many hours a day should one practice, quality or quantity? Well, I think that's really up to you, what you can spare. I had a friend who once said that if you have to practice for more than 3 hours a day, you can't possibly be very effective. Depends on how much you have to accomplish. I mean, if you're working 9 to 5 and you have only 2 hours a day or only an hour to practice, don't beat yourself up. Go for that quality. Yeah. Talk with your teacher if you have somebody who you're working with to give you an idea of what you can accomplish in an hour. Maybe you're somebody who just want to play chamber music and you want to just learn tough passages of an upcoming quartet or trio or sextet that you might be playing around with some friends. So you want to probably just pop in and use that hour to do a little bit of calisthenics, so you understand. You get in touch with the physical health of how to navigate your cello, and then deal with solving the problems of the piece that you might need to encounter. Is there a particular practice method that you swear by that has remained of constant value for you over the years? A go-to strategy? My goodness. Well, I do what I believe I heard that Heifetz does, which is just I always go and warm up with my scales and arpeggios. And I sometimes go to Kosman to sort of, make sure my hand framing and I really do some extra calisthenics. But I don't always, when I'm on touring and performing all the time, there might not be as much time to just simply be able to go through all sorts of etudes. When I have time, sometimes I like to just go through all 40 of my proper etudes or all 12 of my Piatti caprices. But that's it. And when I don't have time to do more than one, then I just do one. So it really is just, what amount of time you have, and being realistic and happy and positive with the way you work during that time. Another question, what are the best ways to prevent injury? What is your balance between technique and repertoire? Okay, so let's see here. Best way to prevent injury? Well, definitely you want to maybe work with somebody who can see what it is that you're doing, your teacher. Might be able to definitely think about good posture. If there's something that you're doing that really doesn't look familiar in any other time that you use your body, like if you have to contort or do something like this where your hands are kind of goosenecked all the time, that's definitely going to create some harm down the line. So you want to, most of what I believe in ergonomic playing is that your bow hand should pretty much look and function like when you're doing anything else in life. If you're picking a glass up, your wrist is relatively straight. It's not, you can't really dangle and be very effective at holding that glass of water for long or picking up a music stand. So yeah, it would be really helpful for somebody to, help you evaluate whether you're doing something wrong. And if you're already injured, definitely see somebody. What is your balance between technique and repertoire? Oh, definitely always bouncing between the two. I do the technique only when I need to, as a maintenance or as a warm-up, but most of the time I work for new technical skills or use the ones I already have in repertoire. So I spend a lot of time in repertoire. How do you start learning a new piece? How does this differ between chamber orchestra and solo rep? How do you start learning? Well, a new piece, there's not a lot of difference, I would say, between chamber orchestra and solo rep in the way that I approach sight reading and learning. I notice everything. Start out with a bird's eye view of what the music is all about. You notice the tempo, the meter, the key. Definitely orient yourself in the key that you're in. Figure out what whether there is tough parts. I always go to those tough parts and work out the technical solutions and musical solutions. That's all together. You don't try to separate those two. Maybe you want to prioritize when you do what, but you will always have to deal with both. And then, put the music together, practice by phrases, like I mentioned earlier on in my presentation. How has your practicing evolved over the years or even recently? Is there anything that has surprised you? Well, I think my practicing has evolved to be definitely more efficient as I know more. And it allows me, I think I'm able to use a shorter amount of times to accomplish more because I know what I want to do. And that's partly because of the number of years of experience that I've had. So that probably will result in a much longer discussion. So I will leave it there. Is there anything we haven't discussed that you feel is vital to productive creative practice sessions? Or if there's one thing that you feel contributes the most to this? And let's see here. I'll just read a couple more comments. I have scarring on my vocal cords from acid reflux and can't control my pitch very well anymore. So singing hasn't been very helpful, so I don't do it much. Unconsciously, however, I tend to hum during difficult parts, and my husband says I'm totally off pitch. Oh dear. And another question, I am currently preparing a full-length 90-minute recital along with several excerpts for symphony auditions, and I struggle with keeping all the stuff at a high level. Do you have tips for this? Okay, well, I think a practice diary has sometimes helped me when I had to have a lot of repertoire in my fingers. There have been times when would have maybe had to have 2 full recital programs and a couple of concertos and maybe about 10 chamber music works on the docket before I had to leave for maybe a month or 2 of summer festival travels. So I remember that drawing up kind of a diary or diagram of listing all of the pieces that I had to be responsible for and all the movements. I remember I think I had to do Schubert Arpeggione and Prokofiev Sinfonia Concertante similar time. So those are very tough repertoire. And then of course I also wanted to deal with not neglect my scales, arpeggios, and pauper etudes. So I list those, and knowing that full well that I cannot go through every single item every single day. And so repertoire on one side, dates and times in little boxes, sometimes definitely help me through that period of time, so that I can sort of see, okay, on such and such day, Monday, for instance, I'm able to do, A flat major scale, and first and third movement of Schubert Arpeggione and second movement of Prokofiev, and that's kind of about it. So I start out with the things that worry me the most, and I do them as consistently as possible. And I mix in the other things that are easier. Like if you have a sonata movement, sonata by Rachmaninoff or Chopin or Beethoven, they're easier movements that you can do later in the day when you're a little more tired. Use the freshest moments of your day for the toughest repertoire. And knowing that, and then also maybe slower movements for later in the day when you don't have to rely on high energy and agility. And over the course of several weeks of practicing, and I also started to, notice that, oh goodness, I've gone 2 days or without touching that particular movement. I definitely need to not neglect that. So I'll definitely hit those movements. So you alternate, and you don't beat yourself up over it. And a nice diary allows you to sort of say, yeah, I did the best I could with my time over the course of this week, and I touched on everything. So you want a coat of paint on everything, at least during the course of every 3 or 4 days or a week. So 90 minutes, that you shouldn't have trouble being able to navigate, dealing with rotating through all the repertoire over the course of 3 or 4 days. All right. Well, I think that marks the end of the questions. So any closing remarks? Well, I think I'm just really happy that I have had this chance to share some of my ideas about a creative and efficient use of your time when you practice. And I hope you will all be able to find some measure of joy in learning as you continue to practice and play your instrument. And I hope you can also always be able to remind each other and your friends, and remind yourself and your friends to listen, love, and learn. And hope to see you at future events. Take care.